Rima, do we have the technological issues worked out?
Yes, thank God we're in San Jose.
Terrific. And again, Rima Griffith, Washington State Transportation Commission Executive Director. Welcome to the podium. We are eager to hear from you.
Thank you. So, Washington is come behind Oregon. We have been watching Oregon very closely as they have basically blazed the trail. No question about it, and our legislature and commission have had Mr. Whitty come up a number of times through the years as he went through this evolutionary process. So we have definitely benefited from the education work they have done to help us move forward in our process. So in Washington State, the long-term funding challenge we face, it kind of sets the stage for this. Our legislature has shown a lot of leadership in raising our state gas tax a couple of times over the last decade. It's taken a lot of leadership. It's a very difficult political vote and a heavy lift, and they have raised it twice. And each time they do it, they tie a specific project list to that tax increase. And then they bond it, pretty much almost at 100%. So we created this situation now, this little predicament we're in, which is the public is perceiving taxes to go up, and they feel like they're paying a lot, and they're seeing construction going on in spots around the state. But we keep telling them we need money and we need more, and the system's falling apart. And so how do we help educate the public on that? And what's really happening is we take those dollars that we generate, or the anticipated dollars, and we bond them over time, and we build that specific list of projects, but there's no wiggle room to do anything else. And maintenance and preservation is often sorely underfunded, and so that falls off the radar as well, which is difficult. So as you see here, we're looking over the next 13 years at about 70% of our net portion fuel tax revenue is being obligated just for debt payments. So we are heavily leveraged and face a challenge here long term. And then the other issue, as Jim touched on, is the pace of fuel economy. Is going to determine the level of risk. And it's really not a matter of if, it's really a matter of when. We're watching fuel consumption decline slowly, and VMT is slowly going up. And the undetermined factor is how quick our fleet is going to transition. We look at the federal standards that were set. The industry, the auto industry, seems to be on pace to far exceed that. And it seems that the market, the consumer, is ready and willing to purchase these, of course, high-mile vehicles or hybrids or electrics for, if not nothing else, for the pure economic sense that it makes in terms of cost savings. So it's a logical step, and it's something we understand in Washington. We are very sensitive to environmental policies and aspirations, but it creates that double-edged sword for transportation because we also want the revenue. So we want gas to sell, and we want that gas tax money. So that's kind of what we're facing. And so it really takes a lot of foresight and leadership because we've got this cute frog sitting in a bowl of water and it's warm. It's not boiling. And you don't want to wait till that water boils and you're cooked. You got to have a little bit of thought here to say, we better start moving now because this is a big shift in what we're thinking about of how we're going to ask people to pay for the transportation system. And it contemplates a very different way in how we're going to communicate and interact with the public. So as we move forward, we've taken a very sequential manner. It's been very deliberative. We started in 2012, and the legislature directed or tasked the Transportation Commission with assessing the feasibility of transitioning from the gas tax to a road usage charge system. And it was informed by a stakeholder committee that was created in the legislation, and the outcome was that, in short, yes, it's feasible, the technology's there, but we also identified a lot of policy issues that will have to be dealt with in order for this to move forward. So we've been taking baby steps. Every year we go back to the legislature and we report and we tell them what we learned. And so in 2013 we went back and in the 2013 session we told them, yeah, it's feasible. And then they said, okay, well, now we want you to go forward and we want you to determine what the business case is for Washington State. Does it make sense for us to do it? What are the dollars and cents of the matter? And is it really going to pencil when you compare it to the gas tax? And the short answer was there is a business case to be made, and that there definitely is a lot of work, and you think about these steps. It's like we started out at that 50,000 foot level, we drilled down to about the 30 or 20,000 foot level, and now in 2014 we're getting down to about the 10,000 foot level. So we kind of are peeling that onion back around the policy considerations and the fiscal implications of doing this. So in 2014, our legislature directed the Commission to start developing a work plan that refines these policy issues we've continued to work on with the steering committee, and develop a concept of operations. So now we're kind of contemplating a blueprint of what this could look like for Washington State. And all through this, we're conducting a financial analysis. We're always resharpening our analysis around the revenues and the costs as we learn more, and as the policy determinations start happening with the steering committee and the Commission. The legislature also asked the Department of Transportation to work with the Western Region consortium that Jeff talked about in starting to discuss how are we going to do interstate travel, how are we going to reconcile that and do this together. And then they asked our state treasurer to assess the implications of replacing the gas tax in the context of that earlier slide that we have a lot of bonds let. We have a lot of legal obligations around past gas taxes. Can we defease those? Do we have to keep paying those? So what are the legal implications from a financing side as well? So why the Transportation Commission? The Commission is a 7-member body appointed by the governor. Members come from all over the state. It's not vested. It's not the operator of the system. And so in a way it carries an independent role and function as far as assessing transportation overall. The Commission also advises the governor and the legislature on all things transportation, policy, and financial. It's the tolling authority, and it also authors the 20-year state transportation plan. So they have a very broad view of transportation, and to our legislature it seemed to make sense to have them lead the effort, of course with DOT playing a very close partnership in the advancement of it. So the challenge of change is very difficult, and this is truly a paradigm shift that we're contemplating. And a lot of that creates confusion and fear and reaction, and so we have been very careful about what we talk about and when, how we have engaged the public, which actually has been pretty quiet. We haven't been going out with press releases and trying to drum up questions and inquiries around it. It's really been a rather quiet, deliberative process to this point. And as you can see, there's a lot of issues that we have to wrestle with that will all carry a lot of public debate and conversation around fairness and equity and privacy and choice and data security. So all those things are a big challenge for us that we are working through. So we've taken an education communication approach of establishing a 24-member steering committee similar to Oregon's model. It's got currently 8 legislators on it. It has 3 commissioners, and the rest are made up of key industry leaders and stakeholders from the business sector, the environment, transit, cities, counties. So we've got a lot of people around the table, and the thinking is that as we go through this process and learn together, they become not only our partners, but advocates in a lot of ways to their constituencies. So as they learn and they come along with us, and we all kind of discover where this is heading, they're going back and having conversations with their folks, which helps us also get the word out. And it's not just the state government or the commission or the DOT saying we need to do this. You've got real people that are invested in it that have a trust built with their constituency. So in phase 1, which is where we're at right now, we're learning, and we're really not engaging the press unless it's rather reactive. If we get an inquiry, we do interviews, but we're not out pushing this message quite yet. But in the end of this year and into next year, we will need to start stepping up that public conversation. And we actually just completed collecting some data. We have a survey panel that you'll hear about later today that is statewide. And we've been slowly asking citizens of Washington State to talk to us about the kinds of vehicles they drive, their mileage, their travel patterns. So we're starting to get data, projectable and scientifically valid data, that helps us start painting a picture of how Washingtonians travel. And that'll be an important point for an important piece of information for us to have as we start crafting and drawing this blueprint up. And in the future, clearly, we're going to have to be doing focus groups and a lot of things Oregon's already done in trying to both educate the public and start that two-way dialogue about what's happening and why. So in Washington, there's definitely different approaches here. There's the planning versus the doing. Oregon definitely is a doing state. They, as Jim talked about, they've done a few pilots, they've done a lot of testing, and that, there's no right or wrong approach here. They're all effective and they all accomplish different things. I will say doing costs a little more. In Washington State, we're at about a $3 million investment so far, so it's pretty relatively low in terms of how much we've spent on this. The planning approach is deliberative and methodical. It's slow. You know, we're studying this, and so you will have critics saying, "Well, you guys are always studying stuff. You don't do anything. You know, are you going to actually? Is this going to produce an outcome?" So there are the critics of that, but we are working through it in a very methodical process, and we're trying to set that policy framework that will hopefully drive the overall design of the system if it goes forward. The acting and responding is more about the innovation, the proof of concept. You know, with each success you learn and you carry it forward. And we are learning and benefiting from Oregon's work, definitely, and we're all working very closely together to benefit each other. So the ideal situation is trying to find a balance between that, and we hope that in Washington in 2015 we're going to turn a corner with the legislature and actually start doing some doing and some testing in the coming year. So what we've learned from our approach. You know, we feel like the sequential methodical process has allowed us to build a foundation. We're really having these policies that are controversial and really thorny and hard to get through. We're getting through them with a diverse set of people that are kind of a strange set of bedfellows that oftentimes, you know, are fighting each other and are not getting along and will work to destroy or kill each other's ideas when it comes to lawmaking. And so this has allowed us to kind of build this foundation together and get that buy-in and that support. Determining what we want to do before we do it is allowing us to set the parameters and keep control of that. And trying to come up with reasonable functional solutions that will also address specific public concerns. Assessing the risks and costs and the net revenues, we're continually refining what we're doing. So it's a very iterative process. You know, as we drill into it, we're learning more, and we always go back and redo our financial analysis to make sure, as we start defining this policy framework, it carries the impact of what the costs could be. And the investment made to date is not a loss. It's a learning process, and if it were even set aside by the legislature for a while, it can be picked up later and carried on. So it's not a complete loss by any means. So what have we learned so far? The steering committee and the commission have identified the overarching goal is to find a sustainable long-term revenue source for transportation. And to transition the gas tax potentially out of use. To achieve the goal, we have a number of guiding principles of which those topics in those boxes are going to have to be addressed completely and thoroughly on a policy level in order to advance the system. And then there's some other things that we need to think about, which is it important to worry about the out-of-state drivers? Do we need to worry about people if they're on public roads or not, if they're on private roads? Some of they've kind of gone back and forth, and as we learn more and we do more research, we're starting to see things come clearer, but there clearly still is a debate around should the gas tax stay or not is one of the big issues if this were to go forward. So we've looked at a number of operational concepts, and we winnowed 8 of them down to 3 that the steering committee and the commission are drawing focus to. The first one is a time permit. That is a flat fee, all-you-can-eat kind of deal. It requires no technology, nothing in the car, and it really doesn't correlate to the number of miles you drive at all. It's really like a registration, but it is a time permit, and it will give you an unlimited number of miles to drive, and each year you'd pay it. It's very simple, very non-intrusive, but it would be a proxy to start shifting from the gas tax, and it probably would come at a premium because we'd have to assume a higher mile. So for people who don't travel much, that's probably not going to be the greatest deal. But for people who do travel a lot, put on a lot of miles on their car per year, it could end up being something they want to do if they don't want the technology-based approach. The second option, the odometer charge, is a more per-mile charged approach, but it would be done annually at the time of registration. So you might go in at the time of registration and the first year estimate that I'm going to drive 10,000 miles this year. And you would pay that, and then when you came back the next year, it would be reconciled. So it's not not a technology-based approach, but it would allow for some level of proxy to the amount of miles I drove to what I'm going to pay the state. And again, that per mile fee could be adjusted to to a premium if the policymaker so chose that they wanted to take that approach. The last choice or option that we're looking at is the automated distance charge, and that is the technology-based approach using GPS. It would be pinpointed by total miles driven. So for somebody who really only wants to pay for the miles they drove on state highways, for example, that's going to allow them the most precise way to pay for what they used, essentially. The reason the steering committee and the commission landed on these three is it really gives us the range, the spectrum of possibility from the most basic, rudimentary, non-technological approach to the full-on technology approach. So it starts giving us that perspective of which we may not ultimately land on these, but for the legislature, it gives them a sense of what the range possibility is if they were to go forward. So in the business case analysis, we looked at financial and non-financial considerations, and it's important to note that we looked at both net fuel tax and net road use charges. We didn't just look at gross. We really had to make a lot of assumptions, but we tried to get at the net bottom line. So what are we talking about, and what are we going to get as compared to the gas tax over the next 25 years? So for purposes of the analysis, we did have to make some key assumptions. One would be that the road usage charge would replace the fuel tax in 2015. We realize realistically, not likely that the legislature is going to unplug the gas tax and plug in a road usage charge. But for simplicity purposes of the analysis, that's what we assumed. We used a revenue neutral rate, so basically what the average person is paying right now per gallon. We converted that, and it comes out to about 1.8 cents per mile for the purposes of this analysis. The road usage charges would apply to all vehicles that don't use diesel, so it's all gas-fueled vehicles. And it assumed that the state government or government would operate the system. We developed a financial model of costs and revenues, and with that, we were able to build the business case. So the key findings to date, what we've learned is that it is going to cost the state more to collect a road usage charge than it does the gas tax. The gas tax is really cheap to collect. The system's in place. We're under 2%. Collection costs. So it's going to be tough to beat. But the key is that it's going to give us sustainability into the future. And there is at a point where we would reach a road usage charge system where we're going to exceed, our revenues are going to exceed the costs, and over time it will be more sustainable. The providing drivers with a choice is critical. Jim touched on this, and that is something that has been clear from day one with the steering committee and with the commission, that consumers have to have a choice, and the more you push or box people into limited choices, you potentially create resistance and concern around why do I have to do that. So the idea of having open market or at least multiple choices being provided for people on how they're going to remit their taxes is key, we think, to how this will succeed. Again, the road usage charge ensures everybody pays their fair share. One of the big challenges right now is we watch the fleet transition, and we see cars getting 40 and 50 miles per gallon, and we see electric cars becoming more prominent in the fleet. There is that sense of, how come they're using the road and they don't have to pay anything? And right now you can charge for free. So how do we bring a level playing field? So we believe that fairness point is going to be an important one to point out with the public and to have that conversation, because it seems to resonate with people quite well. Having a consistent and clear message is going to be critical to managing the conversation. The worst thing we want to see happen is for someone to take a myth or an assumption and run with it, and we realize that's probably going to happen at some point. But what we're really trying to do in Washington is manage that conversation with education and inform people about why we're even looking at this and how could it work and how are we, what are the things we're looking at to help bring assurances that it's not something that's scary or that they should fear. And lastly, we think having an objective body in the Commission leading the research and assessment has been helpful in keeping it going, only if nothing else from the standpoint that they don't have a vested interest in the outcome, and so they're able to bring an objective viewpoint, I think, to that debate. So the next stage where we're at right now is we're developing this detailed concept of operations, essentially is the blueprint for the system. The CONOPS is going to be an operational mechanics type document. It's a formal systems engineering document, and it is modifiable as we proceed. So again, we know this is going to continue to be tweaked and morphed, and we're in a position to be able to do that as we learn more. Phasing in the road usage charge. So the direction was given to look at how we are going to actually contemplate doing this statewide thinking that it's not going to be an overnight transition. And so when evaluating that, we're looking at net revenues, the mechanics, and the politics and acceptability around this transition. And the complications that exist with eliminating the gas tax are certainly there. And we've heard from our state treasurer that he has concerns around that. And so the dialogue is starting around what will be the role of the gas tax. I think a lot of people assumed in the start of this it was going to go away at some point. And the treasurer has raised an interesting perspective for us, which is, why does it have to go away? Maybe it should be left for certain purposes, such as when people aren't on the road usage charge system, we would still be able to get, for example, out-of-state drivers to pay into the system if they need gas. So transition options and applications. The steering committee, with the direction of the commission, has picked a couple of scenarios to look at, and this is again for purposes of getting this concept of operations more focused. So we're going to be looking at vehicles with greater than average fuel economy, which is about 22 miles per gallon right now. And all vehicles would be charged if they're under 10,000 pounds. So we're talking light-duty vehicles. The scenarios that will be assessed will be that one is subject vehicles will change over to the road usage system at their annual registration. So we'd be talking about pretty much over a year, everybody would move over. The other extreme end of the spectrum would be that the vehicles would transfer at the point of when a title or a car is sold. So you transfer your title. That we're looking at a more of a 10 to 15 year range. So they picked these two extremes to again get a sense of the realm of possibility. There are other approaches that could be taken ultimately. And then on the gas tax, we're going to look at removing it at the end of the transition period. And the other option is to retain it in perpetuity. The urban-rural equity analysis is something the legislature directed the commission to do, and we're utilizing our online survey panel for this as well. It's common to hear concerns from rural drivers that I have to drive a long way just to go to the grocery store. I have to drive, 20 minutes to see a doctor. So clearly I'm going to have to pay more than my urban counterpart who might be able to walk to their destination or take a much shorter trip to get there. So the legislature asked the commission to gather some data and do an analysis on what is the potential impact and what could it really be on rural versus urban drivers. And so we are in the middle of that right now, collecting data on both driver patterns, driver vehicle, fleet, makeup, and we'll be collecting all that data and reporting it later this year. So that's yet to come. And then Jeff talked about the Western RUC. One of the other directives from our legislature was to look at how interjurisdictional cooperation was going to work in terms of remitting the fees and how that would come together. And so we await the findings of that as well. And with that, happy to take questions or do it at the end.
I'd like to do questions now because you provided so much detail.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Alvarado, welcome. We're delighted that you're able to join us today.
Yeah, I apologize for being a little bit tardy. I'm trying to build a house.
Bobby, just blame the traffic. That always works here.
I noticed that, and I'm sure that I just talked to Commissioner Medoffer about the out-of-state charge, but the diesel exemption, so will the gas tax stay on diesel?
We have a diesel tax in Washington State, and that would stay in place,
Right.
presumably.
So that'll just stay in place for all the diesel?
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions of either the Washington State or the California Commission? No?
I have one.
Great. Commissioner Art and Commissioner Medaffer.
Yes, this is just kind of a general observation. We in the transportation community have been mulling this over, talking about it. We're at a certain level, and the rest of the world is like not even close to being clued in. Mm-hmm. And to the degree that they get a little whiff of it, it ends up on radio talk shows and articles and op-eds, and it's like, there's a lot of volatility over this issue. And I'm just wondering, since a lot of it is driven by the fact that we seem to kick around the gas tax as being an old dog that just has outlived its usefulness. Part of the reason is our own fault. We've never indexed it. We've never increased it. Mm-hmm. And suddenly now we don't want to do anything with this gas tax anymore. We want to implement the VMT. I'm wondering why we're not focusing the VMT as a transition. Someday maybe we get to the VMT as the overall, but we can see all the complexities involved in it. And I'm wondering why we're not focusing, and this is rhetorical, it's not you're not responsible to answer my question if you don't want, but maybe you are. I'm just wondering why we're not focusing on the cars that are spurring this, those that are using the system and not having to pay anything, and going right to the fairness issue, saying, hey, look, we gotta be fair about this. You guys are putting as much stress on the system as everybody else, and we need to have some way of recouping some of that cost, and then worry about the rest. The gas tax. This whole equity thing just blows me away. If you live out in the country, you're already dealing with it. You're paying more gas every time you go somewhere. Who do you appeal to? Well, you don't appeal to anybody except your own pocketbook. You figure out, fewer trips, or you do whatever you got to do. You get a different car if you can afford it. If you can't afford it, you're stuck driving an old pickup that gets lousy mileage, and you're driving a lot of ways. Who do you appeal to? So I'm not too sure why. The gas tax is already on a purely market-based system takes care of a lot of these issues without a lot of technology, without a lot of bureaucracy. So I'm just wondering, rhetorically, I'm wondering why we're not focusing on the cars or the vehicles that really are the source of the problem, and then take another look at the gas tax and try to get the politicians to buck it up a little bit and at least index the thing. We wouldn't be talking about this nearly as much if we had indexed it back in 93, 94, when the last time the feds increased it. The gas tax would probably be another between 15 and 20 cents more than it is today, and I'm not sure we'd all be quite as worried about it.
Well, in Washington, you're right, and I think you raised some very valid points that our commission has even actually chewed on some. We are, in one of the scenarios on the transition, we are looking at the isolation of the higher than average fuel vehicles or per mile vehicles. So there is a possibility that ultimately we, at least from a transition standpoint, the legislature may say we only want to have this initially go to cars that are getting over 50 miles per gallon in electrics. That's a very high possibility, and so that definitely is on the table and is consciously being looked at in this analysis this year. The gas tax, Commissioner O'Neill raised this question last year, and it sounded like an innocuous question that we thought we could answer pretty easily at one of our meetings, and it was, why are we doing all of this, and why can't we just raise the gas tax and keep raising it? I don't understand what the problem is. And everybody said, yeah, that's interesting, and we went back. It turned into about a 2-month rigorous analysis. And we had to make a lot of assumptions, but really what the end result is, there is still life in the gas tax, there's no question. And what we learned is, when you look out over, let's say, 30 years, it would require the heavy lift of the legislature quite frequently, more frequently than they're going to want to do, perhaps every 2 to 5 years, of ratcheting the per gallon price up. Now, you can index it to inflation, but we need inflation to make that worthwhile. And in the past, it would have produced money. Right now, we're not seeing the inflation levels that maybe we would need to see to help start to help close this gap we've created by the stagnation of decision making. So it is an approach, but it isn't a sure thing when we tag it to an economic indicator like inflation. So you've got this combination that creates a problem that, again, long term may not be the most sustainable approach. And so that's kind of how in Washington the tone has been taken. I will say on a parallel note that our legislature is, this last session and the coming session, is very actively considering another gas tax hike. And so it does create this interesting public policy discussion around, well, you're raising our gas tax, but you're also telling us we need to get off the gas tax and we need to go to a per mile charge. So which is it? And it really is both, and we're in that point right now where you can't just go to a per mile charge. It's going to take years and time. The gas tax is still viable, and so I think they're trying to utilize both approaches in a careful way.
Let's go to Commissioner Madaffer, Vice Chair Dunn, and then I'd like to weigh in as well.
Thank you very much. And your last comments, I liked your word stagnation. I'll call it a lack of leadership, lack of intestinal fortitude. There's a number of areas where there's just been a terrible ignorance in keeping up with the investment we have in our infrastructure. And I'd say that at the national level, and that's the case on a number of the states as well. But that being said, I do think that you just alluded to what I was going to make. It's just as a comment, then I have a question, and that is, this is going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. As Jim Whitty's talked about, it's just a small little test to begin with, and we need to be reflective of the fact this might be 15 years before we see anything like this on a 5-state basis or even larger, and therefore there's no question the gas tax needs to work and needs to keep up. But, as Commissioner Inman just noted, there's those of us that drive electric cars that I'm not paying my fair share, and so, I'm happy to sign up and be part of a pilot. Two things that you said in your presentation, you talked about the stakeholder committee. What's the makeup? You said 24, and it looked like it's evolving. Can you give us a sense as to the types of folks that are on the stakeholder? And then I'm going to ask you a question about diesel.
Yeah, you guys actually have a handout, road usage charge handout, and on the back there's a list of the membership. I don't quite have it memorized, but there are 8 legislators. It has grown
No,
from...
I did see that.
You did see that, okay.
Right, I did. So based on that, though,
Yeah.
do you feel that that's a good makeup?
So far, so
how has
good.
it evolved, and what would you add, and what would you take away?
I think the challenge is the size. These things always want to grow, and it could become unmanageable at some point. Right now, 23, 24, it's great. It's a great group of people. They get along great. Like I mentioned, there's some strange bedfellows at the table that have not always gotten along historically. And so it's been good that everybody has kind of checked their prejudgments at the door. We have some ground rules about how people participate, not sending substitutes, for example, because we want to build the institutional knowledge with these members, and so they can become strong speakers for us down the road, pro or con, but the point is we want them to be informed. Where they land on the issue at the end of the day is yet to be known in some cases.
How often do they meet?
This year they have 3 meetings. Last year I think we had 4. So it takes a day of their time when we meet, and there's a fair amount of stuff they have to read about a week before the meeting that they'll get. And then, of course, the commission spends a lot more time than that on it. But the steering committee, the idea was the legislature really didn't want the commission to just be the only body looking at this. They liked what Oregon had done with this notion of bringing everybody around this big table and having, whether it's the ACLU or the Trucking Association, the auto manufacturers are at the table, getting everybody together and kind of throwing down what are their concerns, but let's try to find ways to find solutions and not find reasons to fight or undermine transition and progress. So it's been a challenge, but I think it's been very productive, and I think the makeup right now is great. The worry is we went from 4 legislators, we've now got 8. We have a few that just show up because they're interested, which is great. We need more advocates in the legislature, and politicians understanding this is helpful to that discussion when we get into Olympia during session. And so we're really happy that there's that interest, and it's creating real leadership in the legislature around this whole need to go forward with something at some point. And we're very careful not to completely wed to it, and they have been very careful to say, we're assessing, we're looking at it, because I don't think everybody, it's a slam dunk. There's still a fair amount of skepticism, and we're watching Oregon closely. We want to see how this pilot goes next summer. So, and I think Washington may be ready to do a pilot in a year or 2, but it's very, very slow and very careful in how they're moving forward. So,
thank you.
Jim?
Can you just address
Jim? If you could wait just a moment. Okay. We still have 2 more speakers, and time check-wise, we have 18 more minutes, and our afternoon is as packed as today. Rima, you'll be joining us for lunch.
I'll be
as
around.
Well. I'm willing to hold off on my questions, if you wouldn't mind as well. And the good news is we're obviously quite interested and engaged, and the bad news is there's just never enough time for important topics like this. So, thank you, colleagues. But Rima, if you wouldn't mind, we want to make sure that we also hear from Mayor Walton, who's traveled a long way, as well as Norma Ortega. Mayor Walton, we're going to ask you to donate to the California Transportation Commission a penny and a half for every mile you traveled here.
Well, at least I didn't get rerouted via Salt Lake like my colleague did last night flying down. But, thanks very much. I'm going to speak from a slightly different perspective, obviously being Canadian, but I would start out just by saying that California is by population, is the 4th largest Canadian province, I believe, or the 5th. There's 1 million people Canadians in California. and there's probably about 150 to 200,000 Americans, including my wife, living in Vancouver. Our kids, I have a son and daughter working in San Jose and San Francisco, so our family split. We call the border the ugly border. I'm English. I grew up in a brick row house in Manchester. My wife in Pullman, Illinois. So we have we look down the west coast in British Columbia. We have a lot more in common with Californians, Oregonians, Washingtonians than we do with Albertans, quite frankly. So we have a very, very tremendous vested interest in what's happening, the leadership being shown in Oregon, Washington, and California. I'm here to learn about referendum techniques. I got a whole week full of meetings, so I'm here to hopefully teach you a little bit in a few minutes, tell you a bit about what's happening elsewhere, and also learn. I realize I got 9 minutes, so I'll go as fast as I can. So anyway, I spent 8 years as a tour bus driver in Europe, so I'm pretty familiar with European capital cities and seen a lot of changes there over the years. I was told, I was doing a presentation in Geneva last year, and I was told to use the expression mobility pricing. That is what's used almost ubiquitously in Europe now. Mobility pricing, and avoid strategically the issue of road tolling and road pricing. Don't mention the word road when you're approaching. I just pass that on as an informational piece. They emphasize, the Swedes especially, emphasizing whenever people are paying more within urban areas, talk about the fact that they're buying time. It's all about increasing road capacity by shifting travel times and patterns. So we're taking a slightly broader approach called mobility pricing. And TransLink, which is the Greater Vancouver agency that I'm a director of and chair the political representation, we are a multi-modal, if you like, organization. We look after everything from cycling to certain bridges, as well as public transit and a whole bunch of stuff. So we have a slightly different perspective. But we'll start. Hang on a second. Great. What is motivating Metro Vancouver to develop mobility pricing? Well, I guess the fact is that we virtually are sleepwalking in our way into a regional tolling process. We're sleepwalking because I'm not here from the province. We don't have a transportation commission. We really are looking after it on our own in Metro Vancouver. We don't even have a national transportation policy from the federal government. So transportation, especially urban transportation in Canada, is a bit of a wild, wild west, so to speak. And we are providing the leadership probably within Canada, as I'll point out a little bit later. We have very limited federal leadership, no national transportation policy. We're probably midway between European levels of gas tax dependency and the Americans. We're way ahead of you in terms of gas tax. In fact, we're looking at probably ramping back gas tax because we've reached the tipping point where if we push gas tax any higher, it results in less gross revenue, very, very clearly. And obviously at some point you have limits as well that probably aren't that much different from ours. So that's a learning curve that when you can look north to us and find out what's happening there. TransLink itself looks after, as I mentioned, some roads, some bridges, goods movement, cycling, and it's a very sort of fluid situation. We started out, Lions Gate Bridge was built 2 years after the Golden Gate Bridge. Yours was a major Depression area project. Ours was actually built by the Guinness family, the brewing family. They built it as a real estate ploy to develop real estate in the North Shore, where I'm mayor of. And the bridge was tolled for a number of years. Tolling has been around. Obviously, medieval Europe used tolling. Tolling is where we all started, all private lands. We're sort of moving back now, and mobility pricing, tolling back to the situation where we were in the Middle Ages. So it's almost like a natural progression as you need to seek funding sources. This map, I'll just say, if you look at the colors are the relevant things. The colors all represent bridges or tunnels. And the different colors represent the different ownership. And you'll see that one of the challenges we have in Canada is we're all over the map in terms of different agencies who control and fund different projects. Our biggest challenge in moving towards the mobility pricing within the region is to try and bring all of these agencies together. And it's a tremendous struggle because of the political complexities. We have 4 levels of government in Canada. I'm here representing 2 of them, the municipal and the regional. We also have federal and provincial. And it's a very, very complex political situation. Also, if you take a look, one of the challenges we have, for example, in the Bay Area, you can travel, and two of my kids live in the area, and you can travel north-south, and you don't cross a bridge, you don't look at a toll. But if you happen to have to travel east-west, you've got a problem. You cross the bay, you pay tolls, etc. And that equity problem we've been talking about, it's the same in Vancouver and it's east-west. If you take a look, you can go from UBC on the extreme west all the way to the east without crossing a bridge, you're using up more road capacity and congestion than anyone else. You don't pay anything. Whereas if we told all our bridges, people would have to pay for just going a very short distance in a commute. So when you've got cities like San Francisco, to a lesser extent Portland, certainly Seattle, Vancouver, you've got major equity problems when you come to funding your bridges and things, and we all know that. That's what we have in common. This is a quick stab at our political structure. I'm sort of in the middle there, and I chair the Mayor's Council, and I'm on the board of the TransLink Board of Directors. But most of the funding and all the authority comes from the large capital projects from the federal government, and the provincial government, through its Transport and Investment Corporation, makes the policy and legislation that determine our existence. Municipalities in Metro Vancouver, we control the property tax base. We always find this game where senior levels of government are trying to push down on property tax, saying there's lots of capacity to that. If we're pushing back, saying we're maxed out, it's our only source of revenue. Same game is played probably throughout North America to a certain extent. But we're trying to solve this problem right now. It's probably the most complex governance structure in the world, according to our consultant studies. And it's this whole issue of how you deal with these different agencies and bring them together. We would love to have a Transportation Commission structure, bringing people in from all these different agencies to work together. And I think we're not going to be able to move towards mobility pricing until we do that. For example, in the last couple of years, we have 5 years, we've had 2 toll bridges have been opened. The tolls they've had a very interesting impact within our community. First of all, the major new bridge, which goes across the Fraser River, the Port Mann, has reduced traffic by 20,000. Just the fact that a bridge came in with tolls, and it's the widest cable-stayed bridge in the world, the one on the top there that you're looking at. It's resulted in 20,000 fewer people commuting, which is good, right? Except, of course, it's completely thrown the funding out of whack, because there's times when you thought it would be used within its capacity when it's not, and therefore the revenues haven't come forward. So that has a major impact on funding. We also have carbon tax, which is similar to a gas tax. Our former Premier Campbell developed a great friendship with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Next thing you know, we had carbon tax. Unfortunately, the carbon tax funds did not go towards transit. They went towards tax concessions for a whole bunch of other areas where people are paying all kinds of tax provincially, and it's neutral. So we have this great carbon tax. We're about one of the only jurisdictions in the world that has it. We're very progressive, but not any of it goes back into public transportation, which was the piece that we're struggling with. So hopefully we will keep it and shift that in time. Anyway, the new Port Mann Bridge is currently losing approximately $40 million a year that would have gone towards the interest costs. So we've obviously got some logistical challenges as well on that front. So for contextual issues, for us to consider mobility pricing framework, we've got about 4 issues I'll just cover quickly. One is that our regional plan is really all about densifying certain targeted urban areas. We've got agricultural land in the U.S. border to the south. We've got the ocean to the left. We've got the mountains in my community that run across the whole northern part of it, and we've got rivers and inlets within the middle. We have simply no room to expand, so we're densifying dramatically. And as a result, we do have a SkyTrain, if you like, or a rapid transit system that is growing, but it's very, very expensive. We have very limited industrial land. We have a green zone, and as a result, our growth, we have to provide additional transportation. We have 1 million people coming between now and 2040. They're definitely coming. They're coming from all over the world. Many of them are coming from the west coast of the U.S. moving up as well. We have to find ways of putting these people, and that's the challenge we have right now. The second is that we are an international city. We have a very sophisticated population, come from all over the world. They've seen systems that work well all over the world. They have high expectations, and they're very demanding. The amount of driving per capita is decreasing.
Vancouver is the same as it was in 1965. So we've been successful in keeping the freeways out of our downtown core. We've been successful in providing alternatives. However, right now we've got the slide back where the funding is lagging behind the appetite for additional transit within our city. Transit trips are up 80% since 2000. Within our city. And a lot of that was due to the Olympics, when a lot of folk discovered the rapid transit for the first time and really enjoyed it. A lot of people hadn't taken buses in their lives till they were adults and found all of a sudden that a well-run system can actually save them time and give them additional work time, etc. The mode share for public transit is now 14%, and we need to get that up to 20% if we're going to be able to provide for the people coming ahead.
The demand for transit service, people do want choices. They are willing to use it. The amount of driving per cab, as I mentioned, has declined. And there's no question right now people are now turning away from transit because we can't provide the transit vehicles to meet the growing capacity. A million more people are coming. This particular diagram is just indicating that the gap between the blue curve and the orange curve is effectively the gap between the funding that we have in place right now to meet a little bit of limited growth and the additional funding we need in order to provide the funding going forward. Trying to shorten this just a little bit because I realize there's another presentation behind. The current sources, and I'll spend a little bit longer right here because this is where we're quite different from where we are in the States. For a transit dollar right now, for every dollar that's spent on public transit, the fare box pays about 36 cents, about 36%. The fuel tax is 23%. Property tax is 22%. And then 4 smaller sources, including parking taxes, bridge tolls, hydro levy, and advertising are 19%. But it's the fuel tax that's considerably higher, I think, than it is in the States. And this sort of shows it quite dramatically. We've got Washington, Oregon, California in the left side there. And the red is the state tax rate, cents per gallon, and the green is the federal tax, I think, in the U.S. Where if you look on the right 2 columns where it shows gasoline and diesel in Metro Vancouver, you can see the purple is the TransLink. That's just the regional tax per gallon, just within Metro Vancouver. And then the blue is the provincial tax rate. So if you look at the extent of we have 140 cents per gallon, I guess, this point, and I think that's significantly higher than you're probably paying in the States. Now, we've got there over a fairly long period of time. It's one of the reasons I laughed a little bit and chipped in about the Canadians driving across the border. My son-in-law lives about 2 miles from the border, and he crosses probably every week with this great big pickup truck and fills up at the same gas station down in Lyndon, Washington, and probably saves my family about $200 a month in gas for his construction company. And that's just common throughout Metro Vancouver, and also outside of our regional district, people fueling as well. There's tremendous leakage if you've got these inconsistencies in gas prices. There's tremendous leakage, which is a real problem. We collect, just see, it works out, Jeff, I think it was about, you mentioned that we get about $1 per gallon, US dollars per gallon from taxes, and that money goes directly towards the TransLink within our region, $1 per gallon. There's a major challenge to fuel tax revenue. I think this is the slide that I mentioned that shows that when you're charging at that rate, there is significant leakage. And people do start driving. I mean, ironically, when people start driving more efficient cars and they start carpooling and they start doing the kinds of things you want from an environmental point of view, ultimately your gross revenue from fuel tax drops. So effectively you shape people the way you want to for environmental reason, and then the public transit system ends up with an eroding revenue source. And that's the challenge that we're facing right now. We've been finding that our gross fuel tax has been declining. If we raise it any more, it'll decline even further. That's a conundrum that you will probably be looking at as your taxes go up. It's something you need to consider going forward.
Mayor Walton, if I may.
Yes.
We're almost at 11:30.
Great.
With my colleagues' permission, we will go till 11:45 so that we can also hear from Norma Ortega. And still take a couple of questions, if that's okay, and then we will break for lunch promptly at 11:45.
Well, I will finish in 60 seconds if you'd like. And
I was going to offer you 2 minutes, but I like your idea better.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'll do it. I'll just indicate that Mayor's Council, which I chair, we did put forward a detailed policy direction on mobility pricing in May. It does deal with a lot of the issues that Jack mentioned actually earlier about definitely outlining the strategies, the plans, tying it into and directing to long-term broad goals. And TransLink also has done the same kind of work, tying it into all the regional growth plans. And we got national coverage from the top Canadian newspapers. And we're about the only ones right now that have taken it to this point. But we've got a massive amount of work ahead of us in order to do the detailed work, listening to what Oregon's doing right now is extremely germane to us. We're here to learn very much, but we're also here, if we can, to teach as well. I think we have lessons. As a citizen of the world, I think we have lessons that we can learn from other countries as well, and hopefully the learning will continue going both ways. And I really appreciate the invitation to come here today and share some thoughts. Thank you very much.
Mayor Walton, that was excellent. Thank you. And please don't go too far away, because after we hear from Norma, hopefully we'll have a few minutes left for questions of you both. Norma Ortega, welcome.
Thank you. Norma Ortega with the California Department of Transportation. So are we ready for RUC in California? That is the big question. I am going to briefly go through a few PowerPoint presentations. The history of the base gasoline tax in California. It has not been raised for 20 years. And so the buying power, we have lost about 40% of the buying power of the gas tax. In addition to that, we're losing revenue to the increases in the fuel economy, similar to what every other state has talked about today, and we're seeing that gap really widen with the CAFE standards, and we're looking at about 2030 of significant impact in the billions of dollars that we will lose to fund transportation. So what are we doing in California? We have had a number of presentations over the last few years, or reports. The Commission's annual report talks about the need for funding. It probably every year for the past 10 years. You did a needs assessment in 2011 that indicated a significant funding gap over a 10-year period of about $300 billion. Stephen Keck did a presentation in January of the status of the fuel tax. Those two charts previously were part of that presentation, and we have a significant problem that we need to address. And then more recently, the State Smart Transportation Initiative did a review of transportation, or specifically the department, and one of their recommendations was to take a look at a user fee for transportation funding. So what are we doing? The Secretary for Transportation Agency in California has put together a Transportation Infrastructures Priority Working Group, and an interim report was issued in February of this year that addressed several transportation priorities, and also called for, laid out a few recommendations, and one of them was to study a road user charge as a possibility for a revenue option in California. And over the last few months, we've been meeting as a group, and we'll be developing recommendations to the Secretary and around September of this year. In addition to this, the Department has been working with the University of California's Transportation Center to do additional research into road user charge and what the issues are that would come from that. We've joined the Western Road User Charge Coalition, and we're also a member of the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance in Washington, D.C. We're putting together a group of different state agencies that are interested or should or have a vested interest in exploring the alternatives to the current gas tax. Certainly, the Board of Equalization collects the tax now. Motor vehicle tracks the number of registered vehicles. Department of Finance is the policy, the financial policy analyst for the state. And then certainly the Commission plays a key role, and a number of our other stakeholders. So we're engaging in conversation of whether this makes sense or not. In the legislature, Senate Bill 1077 was introduced in February that calls for an exploration of a road usage charge. And the Commission has endorsed the bill. My understanding is that it's currently in the Assembly floor. There's a few amendments, but we'll see whether this legislation passes or not. It does give us the authority to move forward in developing a pilot program under the jurisdiction of the California Transportation Commission. If that bill does not proceed, then we will be looking at moving ahead through an administrative process, And we would start with putting together a technical advisory committee similar to what Oregon and Washington have done, because we recognize that it can't just be done with transportation stakeholders. And this group would be charged with putting together the pilot, developing the pilot and the different issues that need to be addressed during that pilot, and the metrics for evaluation. This group would take a hard look at road user charge and determine whether it really makes sense for California. It would take a critical analysis of the different issues that we would face, and we would need both stakeholders and influencers to be involved in this process, and we would need an opportunity for public engagement. So you see some of our traditional stakeholders, but there's also privacy advocacy groups, technology representatives, and others that are not typically part of transportation discussions. The CTIP road user charge subgroup has identified some policy considerations that need to be addressed as a pilot is developed. And I think both Jim and Jack went through some of these, as well as Rima. Revenue sustainability, privacy considerations. Certainly there's a lot of concerns about tracking and personal data disposal. The equity issue that was addressed earlier, geographic locations between rural and urban. As part of the Western RUC effort, California will be leading the study on the impact of road user charge on rural areas. And then there's the issue of income and social class that would also likely need to be considered. Technology, we want as much flexibility as possible. Environmental sustainability is another policy consideration that was raised in our group. And travel out of state, this is another area where we have joined with the Western RUC Users Coalition to be part of that research project to understand what the impact would be between travel between the different states that surround us. And then a big part of it is also communication and outreach. The group also is recommending a large demonstration pilot for California, and the participants would be about 5,000 to 6,000. We have 32,000 registered vehicles in California, and we have a very diverse state, and so this would give us an opportunity to test both urban areas as well as a number of rural or central California and other areas to determine if things are different at different times of the year. It would give us more information. We developed a very rough timeline of the different things that we would need to do if we were, in fact, to move forward with road user charge in California. We're currently in the preliminary investigation stage. We would need a feasibility analysis, a demonstration development, as well as proof of concept and legislative mandate to actually do something like this. This is a very ambitious schedule. Listening to the conversation earlier today, these dates may change if we in fact move forward. But it would take legislation to fully enact a change to collect taxes and do something different than what we do now. Moving forward, as I mentioned, we're in the preliminary investigation stage. We would like to stand the Technical Advisory Committee up in January, which is not that far away, and then start the work on designing what issues need to be considered in the pilot program. We would develop the demonstration project in 2016 and kick off the demonstration in 2017. And throughout the process, do public engagement and reach out to different stakeholders and other interested parties. We would evaluate and report back to the legislature and other parties by 2018. And I think these dates are fairly consistent with the latest amendments to 1077. So in conclusion, are we ready to RUC in California? And I think the answer is yes. We need to examine it. And that's what I'm talking about, is not we're doing it, but we do need to explore it and determine whether this is a viable option to the gas tax. 2030 is around the corner, and I don't think we can afford to wait. So thank you.
Norma, thank you.
Was that fast enough?
That was excellent. Both you and the mayor were terrific stewards of our time. We do have about 5 minutes left if there are questions from our colleagues from Washington or from California to either the mayor or to Norma. I see at least a couple of mics to my right, Commissioner Inman and Commissioner Burke.
A couple of quick questions. Mayor, I hope you're going to join us this afternoon because we're going to be talking about freight and goods movement. And while you mentioned that you don't have a national transportation plan, those of us that serve on the National Freight Advisory Committee in the U.S. look with envy to the fact that you do have a strategic freight plan in Canada, and you're already talking about your success. So hopefully you'll join us this afternoon with those discussions too. Norma, a question for you. We've all seen the charts over and over again of our revenue sources. Has anybody updated that, given the fact that fuels are going to go into cap and trade starting January 1st, and we may have some behavior patterns that change if our friends from WISPA are correct with what the impact might be?
We have not done that yet. We should.
Commissioner Burke?
Just a very fast question, Norma. Do we bond our fuel tax in California, or have we ever?
We have not.
And other questions to either the mayor or to Norma? Okay, one question back to Rima then, and perhaps I misunderstood. It sounded like there were twin goals of a model that was revenue neutral, with an overall goal of making sure there was a sustainable long-term source of transportation funding. Those seem to be competing goals if the model is only revenue neutral of moving forward. Is that just revenue neutral at first and then a change over time?
Yeah, I don't know if this mic is working. We did, for purposes of that early analysis, we took a revenue neutral approach to simplify the analysis and the look. Certainly, I think all the participants on the steering committee, the legislators, the commission, are mindful that the actual rate and contemplation of what that could be will play out as those policy items get worked through and we think about the role and function of a per mile charge. So, for example, I mean, it could ultimately and obviously play a direct role and complementary role with tolling. So could your urban areas potentially see a layered on amount of money, for example, for congestion relief or something to that effect? So I think the pricing structure is yet to be worked through, and so for just purposes of keeping this moving through this deliberative process, the decision was made to do revenue neutral at this point, not certainly to imply that that's maybe how it will end up at the end of the day. Because certainly it doesn't contemplate the need for additional revenue that we so much need for maintenance and preservation and all the needs that are unfunded right now. So that we've tried to make clear to the decision makers that we're not suggesting that be the case because it will not ultimately fix the problem if we stay at the 2015 equivalent rate of the per gallon charge. So it was just to keep the analysis going, essentially.
Well, Rima, thank you for the clarification on that. It's almost 11:45. I do see other mics. Darius Assemi and Lucy Dunn. We are breaking in 2 minutes, though, so please keep that in mind. Darius?
I want to talk really fast. And Rima, a quick question. You said you have gas tax hikes directly connected to specific projects, and that's how the legislature has been successful in implementing gas tax hikes. And then you bond around that immediately, so you can go to construction right away.
Right.
These are statewide projects, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get the locals to support statewide projects?
I think the success has been in the fact that they have a specific project list.
In each county?
Yes. It's very political. Legislators will look to make sure their district is getting something, and it helps to go back to their constituency and say, we're making these kinds of investments. I think the DOT does a great job also of painting the bigger picture of the impacts and benefits that investments, for example, that happen in the core Puget Sound area where the Port of Seattle is for freights and good movements, that when we make improvements in congested areas, it's helping the rural part of the state too. So we try to draw a broad picture, but also there are very specific projects that help the legislators keep their constituency happy. And certainly we're an initiative state too, so there have been attempts to repeal the legislature's actions, and we have been successful in keeping the public support for those raises.
Any successful attempts in repealing the legislators?
Yeah, we've had initiatives that have tried to repeal the increases in gas taxes.
No, not the tax. I mean, not repealing, recalling.
Oh, no, nobody's been recalled. I'm talking about the actual gas tax
thank
increase, yeah.
And Vice Chair Dunn, I have to step away for a legislative call, so when you're done with your question and comment, if you could adjourn for lunch.
Absolutely.
We'll reconvene at 12:45, because for those who are going out to lunch, it does take a while to get downstairs and find something. Commissioners from both states and staff, I believe we're going to have filet mignon and lobster brought in for us, so you just stay up here. I'm glad we got that on videotape as well. But we will have sandwiches brought in for the commissioners. Thank you.
Rima, just a quick question for you. Thank you, because I'm giving the high sign that we're adjourning. Carl's already given the words. I just really want to thank all the speakers, particularly for saying road user charge. Stay away from RAC, please. I think it's disrespectful. I think that we really need to say those words. I'm seeing the whole concept of user charges in other industry sectors. For example, even in energy, we put our solar panels on, but they're not actually paying their fair share into the system that they're using. So get folks used to using this as a system use. I love that. And alternative fuel vehicles, thank you as well for looking at that. Some preliminary numbers coming out of the Automobile Club indicate that just on alternative fuel vehicles, not hybrids, that they're are not paying their fair share to the tune of $30 million into the California system. And you know that will grow. So I would encourage a continuous use of that. Are you working with Automobile Club to help with the public outreach on this?
We have the Auto Manufacturers Association, I believe.
Yeah, different.
And AAA, yes, thank you. AAA is also at the table. And between those two, we're working close with, so the industry as well as the drivers through AAA, and getting the word out on educating and trying to, get the information on why we're doing this. So,
terrific.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks. And so, therefore, no other lights on. We're adjourned according to Commissioner Chairman Gardino.